Okay, you guys, I'm going to go ahead and get us going, and maybe we'll have some more of the class join us as we go. Really appreciate you guys joining me tonight and sticking with the class. Okay, so we are in week 3 and heading towards the tail end of the class. As far as announcements go, I'm taking a look at your week 3 explorations now, and have a few more to go, but most of those are now graded. And then tomorrow I will get on top of the week 2 mood board projects. Was a little bit behind my usual schedule with the mood boards last week, and apologize for that, for any delays there. But you can still make edits if I have any feedback on there that suggests edits. You can make those pretty much at any point that you turn in the mood board. You can revise one of the previous sections as long as you let me know. I will take a look back at that. And I did notice that a few of you did that, so that's really, really great to see. Other announcements. Let's see. Anybody who is a campus student, for this week's Friday Blend, we will be gathering in the EB auditorium. That's the Entertainment Business Building, which is 3B, in the auditorium for the presentations from Hall of Fame. So try to make it there on time. And I think that is pretty much it as far as updates go. Does anybody have any questions or any concerns that I could address before we get started? Okay. So this week we are talking about typography. Not typography in the sense of lettering and spacing and all those technical details of typography, but in the sense of style and appearance. This is a little graphic that I saw circulating on social media a little while back, and I think it really applies here because we're still talking about how these elements of our media play a part in setting the tone and communicating a feeling or an idea. And you can see just that simple change of typeface completely alters the impression and the message sent by this little note. You'll always be mine. It can go from very sweet to very creepy with just that one little shift. This is an example that came up in the explorations this week that I really enjoyed, because I think this really illustrates the point. You can get vastly different impressions by just that little shift in style, going from very structured and very stately and academic to very chaotic, very action-oriented and dynamic, while it's essentially the same content. And I also really like this one because it goes back to that original definition of media aesthetics, with various elements joining together to create a perceptual response. It's not any one piece, it's all of them working together. It's the color, the radiating lines that create a sense of action, as well as that very jittery looking electric typeface. And while the other side is almost the polar opposite. Typography is something where a knowledge of art history can be incredibly beneficial. I know you guys do take an art history class, although I don't know that the typefaces are really emphasized. If you look at some of the artwork going back into the 1800s, especially the Art Nouveau era, you'll see there is a really heavy emphasis on typography, though. And that's the one you have down here in the bottom center. It's kind of like what you would see with the artist Alphonse Mucha, who's very well known in Art Nouveau. Did a lot of advertisements and labels for wine bottles and things like that. And it had this very elegant and artistic looking organic script. You have kind of moving clockwise here, the carnival sign. That's very iconic. It's that style of lettering is intrinsically connected to carnivals and circuses, and that goes back to the 1800s as well. Very traditional serif type fonts like the one on the bank up here. That's a very stately, a very serious and businesslike look. And you can get into more specific cultural references like flower power, which is counterculture from the 60s, and can easily evoke that feel, or kind of going in the opposite direction with the very ultra-modern technology, kind of computer-inspired typeface. So these are just some examples. They show that you can evoke ideas of different time periods, different moods, or levels of seriousness or casualness, depending on the type of typeface that you use. This is very much like what I was saying about color, where it's kind of a subtle factor that just adds some flavor to an existing design or existing scene from a piece of media. We also looked at how color plays a part in branding last week. And this kind of continues that idea. Typefaces, just like the iconic brand colors, are a fundamental part of branding as well. The example that I show here, remember last week I switched out the colors between Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts. And now I'm switching out some brand typefaces. And you can look at this, and it says Google, but I bet nobody looks at that and sees Google. They think instantly Coca-Cola, because it's kind of a cultural icon. It's ingrained into our psyche through advertisements and constant exposure. So we don't even have to see the words. The words don't even matter. It's the style of the typeface that matters. And that really illustrates the importance that typefaces play in that type of media as well. These are some other examples. That Disney script typeface is pretty iconic as well. We grow up with the Disney Channel and all the Disney films, and we see that, and especially living where I'm at, it's pretty much everywhere you see the Disney brand. And some other ones that are emerging, like the Harry Potter brand, or some of these other product lines, Ray-Bans, or even NASA. So, point being here that these play a very vital role in establishing branding, and the key is consistency and making it ubiquitous. It's everywhere. Anytime you have branded media, whether it's advertisements like we have here, or a website, or even packaging, that typeface is consistent, just like your colors are consistent, and that creates that personality for your brand. This is something that will actually play a part in this week's segment of the mood board, because you will be selecting your own brand typefaces, and they can be very stylized typefaces, like if we go back, something like Coca-Cola or Disney, that are really out of the ordinary, really unique, or it can be something more more commonly, commonly recognized, some of the traditional typefaces like Times New Roman, whatever fits your brand's personality. But the point is that you set that in your mood board. It creates sort of a style guide for you. And it's something that you can reference back to keep a consistent look and feel in your media designs. In last week's lessons, we talked about how you go about picking colors for a brand. And the idea is you start off by thinking about what personality you want to convey, what kind of tone you want to set, and what the message is that you want to send. And this is basically the same idea here. You start off thinking, what kind of personality do you want? What subject matter are you working with? Is there any kind of iconic typeface that's already associated with that? For example, here, this is a book cover called Bases Loaded. It has a baseball reference, but it's talking about the use of steroids, so performance-enhancing drugs within baseball. So it has the imagery that kind of combines sort of a visual metaphor for the use of steroids in baseball, but the typefaces are very much drawn from the tradition of the sport of baseball. The font that would be used on, say, team jerseys to type out a player's name, as well as this script typeface that's really commonly associated with the signs and advertisements and so forth for that sport. So a lot of times this can inform your choice. If there's something that is already established, you can draw upon those established kind of cultural norms and expectations to set your style. This is another case very similar. It's drawing upon a newspaper aesthetic, and so they use the styles typical of a newspaper headline, especially one from early 20th century World War II era, to create that look and feel. I'm going to move past that one for right now. And also using typography to create a sense of movement and action. You can do that through the arrangement of the text, as well as some of the text warping features that actually Photoshop features. When you select your text, though, you want to the first factor is to select the personality that you want to establish, and then from there decide what you want to pair with that. Just like when you were deciding with how you would pair your colors between analogous colors that are more harmonious or complementary colors that are more contrasting, you can with your typefaces select a pairing that is really contrasting or more calm and harmonious. The readings talk about the difference between a heading typeface and body text. This is really focused on document writing and web design, web content. So that difference between headings and body text will be more of a factor when you have a lot of text, not necessarily in ad design or poster design, but if you're working on a website, headings become very important. Web users will typically want to be able to scan over the content and find the information they're looking for without having to read through tons of copy. So having really distinct headings is very valuable. So the idea there is that you want to differentiate between the two. Use a contrasting typeface. whereas your body text should be very readable, very legible and clear. Translating that over to the kind of media we've been studying, which is more poster and advertisement designs, the heading text becomes your titles or your tagline, with body text providing the details. The ideas remain the same. Your heading text should be very distinct, very prominent, and have a lot of personality, while your body text, the details, should be very clear and readable and legible. And Sarah, here's your example from Hamlet. You have this really very unique looking artistic typeface used for Hamlet, and as you pointed out, it has the crown symbol that corresponds with the characters in Hamlet who are royalty. I really like how they took kind of some very medieval looking elements and paired that with what reminds me of very 1960s era graphic design style. And you can see the contrast between these two, the very formal name of William Shakespeare with the very a little bit chaotic typeface of the title. And it goes well with that grunge style, which I think you pointed out in your analysis. Going back to the article readings from this week, one thing that they emphasize is that you want to have text for your copy, your content, which is the body text, that is highly readable, highly legible. You don't want to make it challenging for your audience to consume your content. That's counter to our goals as media creators. So it's best in this case to stick to the very traditional typefaces, the serif and sans serif. Serifs are these little points, the little hooks that come off the corners of some lettering. Traditional fonts will have those, and those are called serif fonts or serif typefaces. Sans serif fonts are a little more modern, and they lack those, so it's without serifs. So these are more angular and streamlined looking fonts. Either of those will do. Serif style fonts are sometimes seen as more old-fashioned, more traditional, more formal, whereas sans serif is a little more modern, but both are about equally legible. What you want to avoid is using really decorative fonts like these script typefaces or ones that are really stylized with drop shadows and odd effects. Because when you get a lot of text written in this style, it becomes an eye strain. So always err on the side of readability. Some of the safe choices are things like Arial. I like Calibri in the sans serif category. Helvetic and New is really popular. These are all really common, really frequently used. In the serif category, Times New Roman is probably best known. Garamond, Lucida, Palatino, Rockwell, I see come up a lot. It's kind of unique. But really try to focus on some of these. There's plenty of others you can choose from, but don't vary too far from some of these more traditional fonts. But you still want to have, personality in your media, so there's a little bit more leeway with your headers, because headings and titles are short. They're not long passages of text, so you're not putting a big eye strain on your readers for just that one or two word title. the main guideline that the reading gives is that you just want to differentiate the two. The easiest way to do that is if you use a serif typeface for your body text, use a sans serif for your headings, and vice versa. Sometimes there's a font like Helvetica Neue that has very different variations, like Helvetica Neue Black or Helvetica Neue Ultra Bold, I think it's called, and then just the regular one. So it is made for this purpose to have headings and body text, and so you can get away with that. But otherwise, try to change it up. Just some interesting examples. This is from a graphic arts site online. What you'll notice in looking at these is that you rarely see the same style typefaces paired together. It's almost always sans serif paired with serif or script. These like very flowing script typefaces paired with a very structured and heavy sans serif font like Lead Gothic. A few more examples. Like even this one right here, hopefully you can see that, with the script paired with a really very elegant looking serif typeface. Those are even getting very similar to one another, in my opinion. That I would veer away from that. What I often see in the mood boards that that is sort of a red flag, something to stay away from, is say pairing two different script typefaces because they're so similar to one another. Whoa, that's not the way I want it to go. And then there just isn't enough difference to really create contrast and differentiate two pieces of text. Sometimes it can look like it was just a formatting error, like maybe you forgot to revise part of your document and so forth. So creating this kind of contrast can really help create a unique look, define a personality, and allows you to more effectively communicate your information. This is something that oddly came up on my Facebook feed today, and this was an actual flyer put out by a metal band who apparently accidentally put the date and location of their show in their title font, which is basically unreadable. So it's really not doing them any favors. Nobody's going to know where the show is without really straining to figure it out. Or the date. It looks like it's in Dallas, Texas, but that's about as far as I could get. Yeah, in Dallas, Texas, I think Monday, March something 10th. Yeah, so but it's not like you have to work for it. You don't want to make your readers work for it. It is a pain. It's painful to look at. So, while they want to set a brand, they want to have a very unique look, something that's identifiable. Once you get into these details, take it easy on your viewers. There's plenty of room for creating personality. You see with your headers, there's the very 1960s kind of counterculture hippie style in this upper left, more of like a electronic gaming theme in the lower left, or just very traditional. But when you start getting into this kind of territory, then you're just being cruel to your audience. Even this one in the lower right is getting a little bit into the overly stylized territory, though this one's not too bad. All right, so it's just the three of us. You guys can jump in at any time with any questions or comments or observations. But if there is anything, go ahead and let me know. So as you are creating your own personal brand, and in this week's part of the mood board, you're going to select some typefaces. These, you can look at these as typefaces for your personal brand if you want to, or for just this individual design that you're coming up with. Either way, but refer back to your personal mission statement and think about, the tone that it sets. Is it very businesslike? Is it meant to be inspiring? Is it meant to be very poignant and very personal? And select a typeface that suits that. Sometimes even your subject matter can help define that. If you're going for a more rustic outdoors theme, then there are certainly typefaces that will go along with that versus more urban, like street art inspired type of look. And you can go to websites like defont.com or 1001fonts.com and find these for free. Some of them ask for request donations, but for the most part, these are free to use. And you can, find some really interesting fonts to start with. Oh yeah, and Adobe Typekit is also acceptable. Yes. And those are the two that I just mentioned. They are also linked within the assignment, so you'll find them there, but just for your reference here. Those are the two that I use most often. There's plenty of others out there. Just some really quick do's and don'ts. These are just some common pitfalls I see in using text. This one kind of goes back to that concert flyer, and that is choosing form over function, meaning appearance over practicality. You don't want to lose your message. You don't want to make your audience have to work to understand what you're trying to communicate. So setting a personality is great, but know where to draw that line. So these two, I believe this is from one of the articles that was assigned this week, and side by side you see the kind of the do side on the left and the don't side on the right. All the menu items are clearly described using a very readable sans serif font, while on the right side they use that brand, that very stylized typeface throughout, and it becomes really hard to read. Perfectly fine when it's just one word, but when you get a paragraph, then it's really a strain. Don't use too many typefaces. This is a trend I've seen lately, especially with memes and little graphics shared on social media. You'll see little designs that have almost a different typeface for every word in the graphic. This is something it's best to avoid. Try to stick to one or two typefaces at most, unless you have a specific art style. Say you're creating a specific design that for some reason many different typefaces are called for. So if you're, maybe you have a theme of having many voices and you just want to visually represent that through different typefaces, that's a very specific and unique case. But more often than not, sticking to just a single typeface or two typefaces just to differentiate some text is sufficient. use good contrast. This is something that has been particularly important in the Photoshop assignments because you're putting text over a photograph, and the photo could be a very busy background with different colors, and so some of the text can get lost if the color suddenly changes. The background color goes from light to dark. Your text might disappear. So you want to take steps to make sure it's visible. The ideal reading situation is dark text on a light background. So black text on a white background, like traditional printed paper. The opposite, white text on a black background, is kind of a close second choice, especially for digital media. But when you start getting into really low contrast, like gray on gray, or graphics that have a lot of just really busy textures, then you're being mean to your readers, and you're making their eyes strain to understand your words. And there's also an opposite end of that spectrum, and that is really super high contrasting colors, especially neon colors. So this is, of course, is a complementary color pair, green text on a kind of red magenta background, but that super vibrant contrast just becomes very jarring. If you're trying to read paragraphs of this text in that kind of color situation, it's going to become real strain. Your eyes are going to be watering before long. So if you have the option, stick to dark text on a light background or light text on a dark background. But if you are working with images, which is what we're going to be doing in the final project and in our Photoshop projects, then you can take steps to fix that situation. Things like putting a box, a contrasting box of, say black or white or a particular color behind your text to create contrast. Sometimes you can use outlines or drop shadows. Use those really sparingly, though, because they can become kind of a cliche as far as design goes. And then, think about color, especially using contrasting colors. And a good test is just to kind of step away, step a few feet back from your monitor and see if you can still read it clearly. And if there's any doubt, then make some adjustments. Because remember, you don't really know what the visual ability of your audience. Some may be visually impaired, wear glasses, or have other vision issues with their vision, and so the more readable you can make it, the better for the broad audience. Okay, here's one I'm going to put to you guys. I want you to look at this and read all the text that's on the screen and tell me what the problem is here. What have they done wrong with this layout? Okay, so we have the color Arctic doesn't match the description underneath, and it's kind of inconsistent. How do you, especially focusing on the text at the bottom, how would you read that text? What is it? What is the message actually saying? Yeah, it is in all caps, but take a look at how this is laid out. You have a block of black text and a block of white text separated by this line between the two images. But if you read this, would you intuitively read this as two blocks of separate text? Most likely so, right? Because that's how we usually view things. But if you read how that would actually go, this white fox has been given, which is white predominantly spring or summer sets in, this thinner and starts to become. Doesn't make sense because this is intended to be read from left all the way to the right, line by line. But they have created these kind of visual cues that tell us that these are two separate pieces of text. They've broken the association between the two. Yeah, because if you read these as separate blocks of text, it's just nonsense. It doesn't tell you anything. But if you read it as it's meant to be read, this white fox has been given the name due to its coat, which is white predominantly in the winter season. When summer or spring sets in, this coat tends to become slightly thinner and starts to become brown and black. So don't do this. This is a cautionary tale. If you are going to have, text broken up like this, then have it read as one block and then a separate block. If you're going to have it read all the way across left to right in this, like they've done here, then maybe put a text box behind it that is separate from the photos. It doesn't have these little visual cues that tell you that this is separate. Always make sure your associations are clear. And association is established by making things close together, by having them a consistent color, because even the separate colors in this case, which they, in one hand, this is good that they made the colors more contrasting, but it also is another cue that tells us, unconsciously tells us that these are two separate messages, and it's not. Kind of a similar situation here. They have that line that communicates the idea that these are two separate pieces, but it really does read left to right. So if you read it how we intuitively would read this, whether it or not affect work, you see it doesn't maiethic. It's gibberish. So what I would have recommended with this one is to have whether you see it or not on the left. It doesn't affect my work ethic on the right. So it's a little more intuitive. Because if you're going to have that dividing line separating the two pieces, then you're going to expect your audience to consider that two separate pieces. So something to keep in mind as you are creating your own designs. We, especially English speakers, we're conditioned to read from top to bottom, from left to right. And that's how we'll always interpret things. Even if you think about how we interpret the passage of time, we'll usually assume that what's on the left came first and what's on the right came after, because that's how we are conditioned to interpret things. So as a media designer, you want to make sure that you create arrangements that follow that rule, so it's intuitive. Or if you break from that standard, make sure you make it clear how it works. Another thing to steer clear of in most cases is text effects. Things like, these are old PowerPoint word art, but even in Photoshop you can do a lot of text warping. You can do 3D effects, outer glows, drop shadows, and all the rest. There's a time and a place for that, and if you do it well, it can really add to your design, but it can also become at worst an eyesore or make your text unreadable, and then in many cases it's kind of a cliche. Some of these little quirky word art type of effects are overused and seen as a little more amateurish in the graphic art world. If you have a very specific purpose, though, you can use these. For example, the text warping feature in Photoshop can be used to create some great effects, giving a sense of movement, like we saw earlier with the Superman book cover. But unless you really need it, unless it fits your design for a specific purpose, I would avoid those. Are there any thoughts or questions about typefaces, or even how you might go about choosing your typefaces for this week's project? Okay, the mood board is going to call for 2 typefaces, a heading and body typeface. You can consider that to be sort of primary and secondary, since your design won't really have a lot of text. You're not getting into actual body text. It's more of just your primary and secondary fonts. But mainly think about the personality you want to convey and some of the rules that are in the article as far as creating contrasts and differentiating between the two. Our other topic for this week is visual hierarchy. This is separate from typography, although it is related, but it's really more to do with layout and design than with creating a specific style. A hierarchy is just an order of importance. So it's a ranking. In medieval society, we had the hierarchy of the royalty. Below them were the nobles. Below that were sort of the knights, and then the peasants or the workers. And that's a well-known hierarchy. But we're talking about visual hierarchy, so we're talking about order of importance from a visual standpoint. What is most prominent in a design? That will be the top of the hierarchy. And then what are the kind of subdominant elements? What catches your attention next? And then what are just the small details that are there but not really vital to communicating the message? This is a very purposeful idea. If you're creating media, you don't want to leave things up to chance. You don't want to just kind of throw something out there and hope that your audience interprets it the way you want them to. You want them to follow along with what the experience that you had set forth for them. So to do that, you want to intentionally put emphasis on certain elements and then de-emphasize other elements, so that it becomes sort of a guided tour of your design. You say, look here first, and then notice this detail, and then you can get into the fine print. For instance, looking at this example, what would you say is the most dominant element, the top of the visual hierarchy? And I'm just strictly talking about the poster design on the right in this case. Okay, I hope it's working again. So it's just asking, what looking at this poster on the right, what would be the most dominant element involved? The thing that would probably stand out the most would be that orange cup, right? Okay, yeah, there it is. And that is because of the use of color, right? That's complementary colors right there. Orange and blue really stand out. Yeah, and that's been purposely emphasized. And this is very much a sort of a visual metaphor. You have the coffee cup with the steam coming out, taking the shape of a treble clef. So it's a musical symbol. So it's kind of that metaphor or symbol of coffee and music together. And then kind of going down through the design in terms of what else is more strongly emphasized, you get the perfect blend, which is the name of the place, probably a cafe where they have live music. And that's a play on words as well. It's perfect blend being perfect blend of coffee, but also a perfect blend with music and coffee being going together so well. So now we're going down the line in terms of visual hierarchy. We get to the smaller details, things that are still emphasized a bit, like Katie Day, the musician's name, is contrasted so it stands out. And then getting down to the fine details. When you're creating your designs, you can, and the reflection helps as well. It kind of makes it a little bit larger element as well. But when you are creating your own designs, really think about how you can add emphasis to the most important elements. Whether it's the title or the most important aspect of the image or what have you. Some ways you can add emphasis is by contrasting the color like they've done here. You can even do a texture difference, which is just sort of the pattern within the image. If it suddenly changes, that will draw attention because our eyes are naturally geared to look for patterns. Making something larger is always a pretty easy way of making it more attention getting in a lot of cases. And the position. Thinking about how we naturally read. Again, we go from top to bottom, left to right. So things that are in the upper left will usually be where our eye goes first, just because that's how we're conditioned to look at things, at documents. So you can also emphasize things by putting it in that position, or just having lines that point to a particular spot, which hopefully I have an example of here. So this is a really basic example of visual hierarchy. Very large red lettering makes that the most strongly emphasized part, and that's the author's name. So most likely this author has some recognition in the literary world, and so they felt that their name is the selling point. And then taking a step down, you have the whole story in kind of a dark gray, and then other stories in lighter gray. So it's kind of order of importance. Very, very straightforward visual hierarchy in this case. Something you'll often see is extra emphasis given to really emotionally charged words, keywords. Like in this case, the fallacy of campaign finance reform, with fallacy really strongly emphasized in really huge, bold text. And that's because that is a very accusatory term. It's kind of inflammatory. And when somebody is looking, kind of browsing through books, that will be more likely to catch their eye, and also more engaging from an emotional standpoint. When you have a flat visual hierarchy, meaning nothing is really given emphasis, then you kind of leave things to chance. In this case, there isn't really anything given really strong emphasis, so your eye doesn't really know where to go first. Everything is basically considered to be equal in importance. Adding emphasis, adding difference and contrast tells the viewer where to look first, though. And in most cases, this is going to be worth taking the effort to do. Simply circling this person in the photo in red suddenly makes that a focal point, just like we saw last week with the use of accented achromatic colors. Okay, this is kind of an example of what I wanted to show in terms of positioning. If you have lines within a design or shapes that kind of draw the eye to a particular point, you can position your important elements at that point so that their eye is naturally drawn there. These two designs use kind of concentric shapes that pull us inward. The silhouettes of the faces on the left kind of go into that central point, and the circles on the right kind of draw the eye to that where that fly is located. This is a variation on what's called leading lines. If you say if you're taking a photo of a city street, and all of the lines of the road go off into the distance to a point where they come together, those lines are leading our eye to that point. So if you then use that photo and then a design, you can put, say, something important there, like a title or a product, image of a product or something, and the viewer's eye will be naturally pulled to that location to give it extra emphasis. This week we are looking at book cover designs. Actually, that was something that one of my former students recommended for the exploration for this week's lessons, but I always want to really emphasize that all these principles are very media neutral. They apply regardless of what kind of medium you're working with. So in web design, visual hierarchy is still very important. You want to tell your visitors where they should look first. What is the most important features? Whether it's the Register Now button up here in the corner that's provided in red, so it stands out very sharply, or the main content area down here with the big headline that is also presented in red. So those two areas stand out. You're told visually that those are the most important details to pay attention to. And this is just as true with video and film as well. You can we saw last week with the example of the newscast, where the blue background is used in order to make sure that the speaker, the newscaster, or the reporter remains the focal point, and that's a variation of visual hierarchy. Visual hierarchy is going to play a really important part, not necessarily in your mood board, but in your final design. As you approach that design, I really want to see you put a conscious effort into creating a visual hierarchy. Give give the more important elements emphasis, and then create a very structured experience for the viewer. Are there any questions or thoughts as we wrap up tonight's lesson? Yes, the image can be landscape for the final project, and you can really vary the formatting and shape within reason to whatever works for you. Yeah, it doesn't have to be a movie poster. I think I just describe it as a movie poster because that's a really easy example of a visual story that communicates the kind of information we're working with. But yeah, you can customize it as you like. Okay. All right. Well, that concludes what I had prepared for tonight. I do appreciate you guys joining me. And if you are all set, then I will let you go for tonight. And get in touch if you have any questions come up.